Hello, class. Today we're going to finish up our discussion of motivation. We're going to first talk about some more modern research, looking at three of the most widely studied needs/motives that a lot of researchers have been interested in over the past couple of decades. And then we'll end our discussion of motivation by looking at the humanistic psychologist. Humanistic psychologist really started as a reactionary movement against the psychoanalyst, against Freud and everybody that followed Freud in ways to study personality, in ways to do clinical therapy, and ways of looking at mental illness. All right, so let's start with the three big motives. So what are these three? These are the need for achievement, the need for power, and the need for affiliation. All of these have been studied by David McClellan, a psychologist who spent his career at Harvard kind of following in Henry Murray's footsteps in a certain way, taking some of the needs that Henry Murray had elaborated on and doing a lot of empirical research on them. So David McClellan spent the early part of his career looking at need for achievement, sometimes abbreviated little n, big A, CH. So you'll see the abbreviations of these needs. Need for achievement is the need for success. It's the need to become a better human being, the need to challenge yourself. We can also think of it as individuals that are more intellectually curious have higher need for achievement. These individuals strive to do a good job. So it makes sense if we're trying to hire employees, for instance, that we hire employees that are high in need for achievement. All right, for a wide variety of jobs, right? They're going to find new solutions. They're constantly challenging themselves. They want to do a good job. So it makes sense that need for achievement is going to be very practically relevant in personality to look at. A little bit later on in his life, David McClellan studied a lot about need for power. This is the desire, the need to impress your will upon somebody else, the need to influence people, the need to control people, the need for other people to fear, to love you. You want other people to deal with you in some ways, all right? So you can imagine people that have high need for power would like to seek out positions of leadership. And that's exactly why David McClellan was studying need for power. So the relationship between this and who would be a good manager, who would be a good CEO, a good leader, and whatever it is that we're looking at. The last need for affiliation. This is the desire to feel a sense of belonging with other people. This is a desire to be intimate, not in a sexual sense, but to be close to a small group of friends. This is not something that David McClellan spent a lot of time researching, but some of his academic students spent a good deal of time researching need for affiliation. And just to review a little bit, need for affiliation seems to be similar to something that we've already talked about. Can you guess what it is? Desire to be around other people. Maybe this is the same thing as extroversion. All right, maybe need for affiliation is the same thing as extroversion. And if it was, this would be evidence, and this would be an example of a jangle fallacy. Two different names for the exact same trait. But I'm going to argue, and as the literature suggests, need for affiliation is not the exact same thing as extroversion. It is different, and we'll look at these needs in more detail here. So first, let's start off with need for achievement. People high in need for achievement are going to be motivated by challenges and by a variety of different work types. So someone high in need for achievement would not like a job where they're doing the same thing day in and day out. For them, their work is very important to who they are as a person. They get a lot of enjoyment out of their work. So they're not going to enjoy just doing something that's the same day in and day out. They like a challenge. They're going to be intellectually curious. They're very exploratory about their work, and they're going to obtain a lot of satisfaction in completing difficult challenges. Let's look at some characteristics of individuals that are high in need for achievement. David McClellan conducted an interesting study with children where he measured their need for achievement, so low levels, moderate levels, high levels, and he had them do a ring toss game. And with this ring toss game, you have a ring, you have to throw it, it has to hit on one of these like ring post things. Think of like a carnival type game. And there were a couple of different options that you could throw your ring towards. There was one that was very simple, it was very close to you, it was worth 5 points. There's one a moderate distance away that you couldn't hit every single time. It was a little bit challenging. It was worth 10 points. There's one way back that there was almost impossible to hit, and it was worth like 25 points. So where do people throw their rings? That is what McClellan was interested in. And what he finds is that people that are high in need for achievement end up selecting the moderately difficult task, the task that is going to stretch them as a human being, but they're likely to succeed if they work hard. All right, the 5 point, that's too simple. Everybody can do that. I'm not going to get any enjoyment out of doing that task. The 25.1, that's just way too difficult. There's no way I could ever experience success there. But for that 10, if I work hard, I can hit the 10 relatively frequently. And that's what McClellan found. So people high in need for achievement would go for that moderate difficult target, whereas people low in need for achievement were just throwing rings wherever they wanted to. All right. We can see this in the majors that college students end up selecting. People high in need for achievement are going to select majors that are somewhat difficult. Again, not so difficult that they would, fail 100% of the time, and not majors that are so easy that anybody could get an A and anybody could pass it. They're going to select a moderately difficult major. When we're in class, I get people like, okay, what's a difficult major? What's an easy major? And it's always a fun discussion, but I am not going to say anything now because it would be potentially incriminating where I'm like, oh, this major, what's up with that? All right, so how about classes? What classes do you select, right? And what do you select for your psychology electives if you're a psychology major, right? Do you select the harder classes? Do you select the easy classes? Or are you just trying to get through? All right, might depend on your need for achievement. All right. Another aspect of people high in need for achievement, they enjoy tasks in which they are personally responsible for the outcome. So if you're high in need for achievement, you might prefer a sport like singles tennis. In singles tennis, if you lose, it's completely up to you. Okay. Or maybe a game like pool or maybe martial arts where you're the only person that's competing. Your success is only based off of your own performance. Whereas people low in need for achievement might prefer games like football or soccer. There, you could do horrible and still win the game. You could also do amazingly and still lose the game. So people high in need for achievement prefer tasks in which they are personally responsible for the outcome. Group projects, for instance, people high in need for achievement are not going to like those because they might not have as much control over whether or not the group succeeds. All right, high need for achievement individuals are going to prefer tasks in which feedback on their performance is available. They're going to enjoy tasks in which they can easily tell did they succeed or did they fail. So things like math. Math, there is a correct answer. In many of the sciences, there are correct answers to questions. All right, it's very easy to get feedback going, okay, I got that one right, boo, I got that one wrong. Whereas people that are lower in need for achievement might not go for those kind of tasks. They don't necessarily care if there's feedback. So things like the arts, so sculpting, painting. Painting, it's hard to tell if you're doing a good job or a bad job. I mean, somewhat, but it's open to interpretation in many ways. It's hard to come up with an objective criterion of, is this good art? Or at least much more difficult than math problems. Okay, so those are some qualities of people that are high in need for achievement versus low in need for achievement. What's need for achievement correlated with? So we see that people that are self-employed entrepreneurs have higher need for achievement compared to other workers at large corporations. So people that are self-employed are going to be typically higher in need for achievement than individuals that work at a big company. A big company, you're a one cog in this vast machine, and you might not know how your company's success is based off of your own personal work. Whereas if you're a self-employed entrepreneur, if you're self-employed, your success is completely dependent on your performance. McClellan looked at business schools and looked at various different majors in business schools, or what people wanted to do, and found that people that are high in need for achievement are more attracted towards business occupations, whereas people that were more interested in auditing and accounting were more likely to have lower need for achievement, at least compared to people that were interested in business. And this makes sense. Need for achievement has to do with how much you enjoy your being personally responsible for what's going on. Well, business would be a good discipline for you. It'd be a good occupation for you. Okay. Students that are higher in need for achievement are more likely to ask professors before the course begins, what are the requirements of the course, what should they do to study for exams. They're more likely to be concerned with feedback on tests and papers. Typically, the people that come to a professor's office are those that are going to be higher in need for achievement. They want success. Whereas someone that's low in need for achievement, they just need the C to get through the course. You might never see them as a professor. All right, so we see some variability here. But need for achievement is not always a positive thing. So for instance, people higher need for achievement are more likely to cheat than individuals lower in need for achievement. Because again, they have this high pressure to experience success, so they might be more likely to cheat. All right. So need for achievement was primarily studied at Harvard by David McClellan. And at Harvard at this period of time in the 1950s and 1960s, it was primarily a male institution. So all of the subjects in this research were guys. In fact, if you look at a lot of the older psychology studies in the 50s, 60s, 40s, and so forth, sometimes the only subjects in the studies whatsoever are guys. And that's potentially problematic if we're trying to generalize the results of our studies to all human beings. It makes sense that we include women as well. This might be less important for things like sensation and perception, but very important for personality and social psychology. So everything that we've talked about so far, we've looked at need for achievement in terms of male-dominated fields. But how is need for achievement expressed in women? Well, it can be expressed in one of two ways. It could be expressed in the same way that it is in guys, in terms of your career, where women high need for achievement want to experience success in their career. They pick difficult jobs. They set goals for themselves. All right. That could be how need for achievement is expressed, or it could be expressed in a more social manner. So maybe having a good family. So maybe for certain types of women, they would like to express their need for achievement, if they're high need for achievement, in terms of family life. So having children that are very successful in school, having a good marriage. All right. So need for achievement for some women can be expressed in terms of family life as opposed to employment status. All right, so need for achievement can be expressed in different ways. It just depends on what do you consider achievement, what in your life is important. Is it career? Is it family life? Is it something else? So David McClellan, let me back up, sorry. So one might think from the early studies is that need for achievement is higher in men than it is in women. And this is wrong. Okay, need for achievement is the same in women as it is men. It's just achievement might be defined differently depending on who we look at. All right, that's one more thing I wanted to mention. McClellan argued that there are certain parental practices that could promote children of having higher need for achievement later on in life. So one thing that McClellan really argued for was this idea of independence training, to train your children to be more independent, and that even at an early age, the child should be taking care of themselves. They should learn how to do the laundry by themselves. They should learn how to walk to school by themselves. Parents should, as soon as possible, let the child start taking care of themselves when necessary or when it's available. So not putting them, making them walk across a busy street or anything like that, but for things that children can do, maybe like laundry, maybe like making a sandwich by themselves, to do this as early as possible. All right, so for instance, McClellan argued that children should be taught to feed themselves and to be toilet trained at a very early age. In fact, there's one study here by David McClellan that shows that children that have a stricter toilet training in early childhood have higher levels of need for achievement at 26 years old. Okay, 26 years later, so maybe when they're in their 30s or so. Okay. So why is it the case that all of these psychologists are interested in toilet training? I will never know. Freud's interested in toilet training, McClellan's interested in toilet training, but it might not just be toilet training here that's leading to this increase in need for achievement. If your parent is more likely to be strict of toilet training, they're going to more likely be strict about schoolwork and strict about a wide variety of things. So that might be causing this relationship here and not necessarily toilet training. Again, I don't know why so many psychologists from back in the day are obsessed with toilet training. Seems kind of weird to me. But there are a couple of different explanations for this finding. You know, maybe just stricter parents lead to higher levels of need for achievement. If the parent stresses the role of achievement, the child's more likely to internalize that. Other ways that have been found to improve need for achievement are as a parent setting tough but realistic standards. So I want you to do your homework at this period in time. Don't make it so difficult that the child will never succeed, but to set a standard that you expect and that the child can, with some work, overcome it. So this is not just in academia, this could be in sports, this could be in manners, but setting goals for your child and having them meet those goals. All right, but make sure that they're realistic, they're of moderate difficulty, they're not so difficult that no matter what the child does, they're going to fail. All right, applaud successes and celebrate accomplishments. One way to be higher in need for achievement is for you to experience positive emotions when you succeed. So if you provide those positive emotions, you provide that positive reinforcement for children when they succeed, they're more likely to have higher need for achievement later on in life. For failures, you don't want to ignore the failures. You don't want to say, okay, well, let's not worry about it at all, but you don't want to dwell on them. You don't want the child to be so focused on failure that it causes them a lot of anxiety and they freeze up. Doing this would create a large amount of fear of failure in the child, and fear of failure is related to a lot of negative outcomes. So being paralyzed, never doing any difficult tasks because you're so afraid of what would happen if you fail. You don't want that. So acknowledge failures, but don't stress failures. Look at them as a part of learning. Everybody's going to fail sometimes. That's just the way life is. All right. Similar to the previous one, avoid instilling a fear of failure in children and instead emphasize the motive to succeed. And the last one, which is probably the most important one, is to stress effort as opposed to ability. You want to stress the child's effort in doing something as opposed to, are they good enough? So if a child succeeds, you say, oh, well, you worked really hard to do well on that test, as opposed to, wow, you must be really smart. Okay, if they fail, you say, well, maybe next time you could try studying more instead of, you're a dum-dum. All right, now obviously you don't call your kid a dum-dum, that's not very nice, but think about what's going to happen when the kid grows up from elementary school to college, let's say, and they end up getting a bad grade in a college test. Now, if they've been told throughout their life, every success that they've had, they're smart, and they run into a roadblock, they might say to themselves, well, I'm dumb now, or I just don't have the ability to move on. There's nothing I can do, and so I'm going to give up. However, if they are told that effort is important later on in life, they might think to themselves, well, I didn't succeed there, but if I work hard, I'm likely to succeed. I'm likely to overcome this. So thinking that effort is important, especially to academic pursuits, is very important for need for achievement. All right. This is similar to some research by Carol Dweck Carol Dweck has become all the rage nowadays in education, in social psychology, personality psychology, even sometimes in cognitive psychology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Carol Dweck's research because it's been getting so much press. So Carol Dweck argues that need for achievement is a result of our beliefs about intelligence, our beliefs about abilities, cognitive abilities. And she argues that there's two ways of looking at intelligence and cognitive abilities. One is you can have an entity theory of intelligence. With an entity theory of intelligence, intelligence is of a certain amount. You have X amount of intelligence, and it is unchangeable. All right, you're either smart and you're going to overcome this task, or you're dumb and you're not going to overcome this task. And there's nothing that you can do to increase this amount of intelligence. So if you get to a task that you are unable to overcome, you take organic chemistry or biochemistry or whatever you consider a difficult class, you say, well, not smart enough, I'm going to give up. All right, so that's entity theory of intelligence. As opposed to an incremental theory of intelligence. Incremental theory of intelligence, this is the belief that intelligence is changeable, that you start off with no intelligence or a very low amount of intelligence. And based off of your experiences in life, it constantly goes up. So if you end up taking organic chemistry or biochemistry and you don't succeed, well, you just haven't studied hard enough. You just haven't put enough time into the discipline. So having an incremental theory of intelligence is very important for being high in need for achievement, according to Carol Dweck. And she's conducted some research specifically with children. Children that if we can train the students to view intelligence as malleable, as changeable, then later on in life, this is going to lead to an increase in their grades. So even at preschool age, we tell them that intelligence is malleable, it's changeable. In grade school, all of a sudden their grades are going to be better because they have a better work ethic. Well, I failed. It's not because I'm dumb. It's because I just didn't work hard enough. All right. So Carol Dweck has done some important research. This finding here doesn't exactly hold up if we're looking at college-age students or so forth. So if we tell college-age students that intelligence is incremental, doesn't have the same sort of effect. Well, there's many people that have tried to apply this to college students. I could talk volumes about it, but I'm not going to. One more thing, we're talking about beliefs about intelligence. What is intelligence actually like? Is intelligence actually an entity, or is it actually incremental? And the answer is, as you probably could guess, both. Okay, looking at intelligence, it is largely an entity that can be changed to a certain amount. So both of these are kind of true, but here we're just looking at your beliefs, not necessarily what intelligence actually is. So let's move on and talk about need for power. Okay, so David McClellan studied this a little bit later on in his life. So people high in need for power want people to admire them, to be in astonishment of them, or to fear them. Okay, so whatever, I want you to react against me in a certain way. They want to control the narrative. So they want to control the actions of other people's. They want to display their power by a variety of different social ways of displaying power. So we could do this by buying really, really fancy things, okay, showing off all your degrees, showing off your class ring, however it is that you want to show power. People high in need for power tend to show off their power in certain ways. All right. So other relationships with people high in need for power, people high in need for power are quicker at recognizing the emotions of other people. And this makes sense if you want other people to fear or love you. It makes sense that you are able to process their emotions really quickly. All right, because you want to get that reaction out of them. You want to be focused on what they're all about. People high in need for power are going to take more risk when gambling. They are more likely to run for public office, to run for leadership positions, whatever they are. They're going to behave more assertively in small groups, and they like to show off their prestige possessions. So possessions that are of high status, that let people know, hey, I am really powerful. So maybe an example of this is a Rolex watch. Why do you buy a Rolex watch? Your phone tells the time, and not only that, it does about a million other things. So why would you go about buying one of these? for however much money they are. You want to show off. You want to say, hey, I have so much money that I'm so important that I can waste money on something stupid. That's what it's all about. All right. So that's the male version of this. Let's do the female version of this. So getting a bag by Gucci or Prada or what's the other one that my wife likes a lot? Michael Kors. Yes, that one. Michael Kors, I believe, is an important handbag as well. So I don't know if you guys have looked at the price of these handbags. Okay. As a guy, I didn't know these. And then, one day I was like, okay, well, my wife likes a Michael Kors bag. Let me see how much they're worth or how much they cost. And it was like way too much money for a bag. Like I could not justify buying that at all. All right. But why do you buy this bag? Why do people like this bag? Okay. Well, it's all about power. All right. You go to a business meeting, you put that bag up on the table. They know that you are important, that you have the money to waste on a very expensive bag like that. Mind you, they're probably nice. I don't know. But why spend all the money on a Prada bag or a Gucci bag when like a grocery bag would do just as well, right? You can keep all your stuff in a grocery bag. But again, it has to do with displays of power. All right. You want to, it's about impression management. All right. Like need for achievement, there are no sex differences in need for power. All right, males and females are virtually the same in need for power, except sometimes in guys it's expressed in a very negative way. Sometimes. Okay, so men that are higher in need for power are more likely to have dissatisfied dating relationships. They're more likely to get divorced. They're more likely to get into arguments. They're more likely to rate their ideal wives as those being dependent on them. So who's the ideal woman you want to marry? Someone that is poorer than me, someone that relies on me for whatever. So someone high in need for power is more likely to say that. And men higher in need for power are more likely to abuse their spouses. So there's a lot of negative consequences for need for power as well. But it's not always expressed this way in men. Some researchers have argued that with responsibility training, life experiences early on that show you how to take care of others, that this leads to a more healthy expression of need for power. So for men that have younger siblings growing up and having to take care of them, they're less likely to express their need for power in a very toxic manner. All right. Having to take care of animals, having to take care of something else, you're in control, you're in power, but you love whatever is underneath you and you have to look out for its needs and care for it. That's going to, that's responsibility training, and it's going to lead to a better expression of need for power. All right. So David Winter, who is one of David McClelland's most famous students, has argued that socialization, the society that we're part of, what we learn from other people, determines the ways in which need for power is going to be expressed, not someone's biological sex. So it doesn't specifically have to do with men, it has to do with how certain people are raised. There's some other negative consequences of need for power as well. If you are constantly dealing with status, you constantly want to be number one in a leadership position, it's going to be taxing for your immune system. So you're more likely to get sick if you have high need for power. So you're more likely to have frequent illnesses. Oh, David Winter, in this sense, has done some really, really cool research where he looks at one society or a bunch of societies, famous works of literature, speeches by politicians, and codes it for themes having to do with need for power. So is this politician constantly talking about exerting will on other people? Or is this politician not having those themes? We can see the same thing in fairy tales. And correlating with need for power in the important literature and the important speeches of a country, we can see whether or not that country is likely to go to war, is more likely to engage in certain activities. So one example of this is he looked at 300 years of parliament speeches. So when a prime minister is elected, they give a speech to parliament. And so he coded all of these in terms of themes for need for power. And for those individuals that report a higher need for power or have themes dealing with need for power, they were more likely to take the country to war in their time as a prime minister compared to individuals that their speeches had less to do with need for power. So Churchill, for instance, probably has a higher need for power with his speeches to Congress. Theresa May, who was prime minister before, the guy now. Why am I blanking out on that? Well, anyway, during Brexit, not very successful. Theresa May, probably lower in need for power. That's going to bother me, forgetting who's the current prime minister. Boris Johnson. There we go. That's the guy. And it just took me a couple of minutes. All right, let's move on to need for affiliation. Need for affiliation, sometimes called need for intimacy. You might think that this is similar to extroversion, but it is different in many ways. So people high in need for affiliation are more likely to spend time thinking about their relationships with other people. They're more likely to report pleasant emotions when other people are around. They smile, laugh, and make more eye contact with other people. And they're more likely to write letters, more likely to start up conversations with other people. So how is this different from extroversion? Someone that's high in need for affiliation wants to have very close relationships with a small number of people, where someone that is extroverted just wants to be around a ton of people. It doesn't matter the quality of the relationships as long as they are around all of those people, whereas need for affiliation, they just want the intimacy between other human beings. All right, so rather than being loud, outgoing life at the party, like extroverts, people high in need for affiliation are more likely to have few but very good friends. People high in need for affiliation have more sincere and meaningful conversations, are more likely to understand what other people are all about. Need for affiliation is correlated with a lot of positive health outcomes. So low levels of stress, less likely to get illnesses, all kinds of wonderful things. This is something where we do find sex differences. Women score higher in need for affiliation compared to men, whereas for need for achievement, need for power, both sexes are equal in those traits. All right, so let's wrap up and talk about humanistic psychology. Humanistic psychology can best be thought of as a reaction against psychoanalysis. All right, it studies the whole person. So that's what humanistic psychology is all about, not just looking at one part of the person, but looking at them in their entirety. It focuses on creativity. It focuses on free will, that people make their own decisions. And it focuses on the positive aspects of being a human being as opposed to the negative aspects. Looking at Freudian psychology, we see a lot of negative aspects to it, right? So having to deal with sex, your relationship with your parents is very interesting, according to Freud, focusing on mental illness, whereas humanistic psychologists are more likely to focus on the positive side of psychology, human flourishing, human success stories. All right, so we can think of it both as a way of understanding personality and a clinical method. And again, if you're interested in clinical psychology, Dr. Hill or Dr. Halliburton have a wonderful class, Clinical and Counseling Theories, where they'll talk about the humanistic method of clinical therapy. So we're looking at terms of motivation of human beings and getting human beings to be successful as opposed to what human beings are lacking and why they are ill. So this developed in the mid-1900s, 1960s, 1970s as a reaction against the psychoanalytic approach and behaviorism. So behaviorism, the whole idea that we can look at, we toss out everything that is unscientific in psychology and only look at observable behavior, focused a lot on learning. Behaviorism is very impersonal. We don't talk about things like creativity. We don't talk about free will. In fact, we talk about the opposite of free will. We talk about determinism in behaviorism. So this is kind of a reactionary movement against those two major approaches to psychology. And it is related to a philosophical movement at the time, that of existentialism. So existentialism is a philosophical movement that has a lot to do with free will. So you are doomed to freedom, as Sartre says. really focused on becoming the best person that you can be, that ultimately you are the one that makes the decisions in your life. So humanistic psychology has a lot to do with this philosophical movement. If you have read, for instance, The Stranger in high school, that is a book by Albert Camus, who was part of the existential movement, probably I don't want to say the founder, the individual that really coined the term existentialism and did a lot to write about what it's all about is Jean-Paul Sartre. Okay. So let's talk about psychologists in the humanistic movement. First, we can talk about Abraham Maslow. Maslow would never have called himself a humanistic psychologist, but we can think of him as kind of the spiritual father of humanistic psychology. Maslow most famously developed this hierarchy of needs, which you've probably seen a gajillion different times. According to Maslow, everybody has to fulfill their most basic needs first before they can reach the top of this pyramid of needs and get to the most successful part of being a human. All right, so the most basic needs a human being has are physiological needs. You need food, you need water, you need oxygen, you need to be able to sleep. If you can't take care of those, you don't need to be doing anything else. You don't need to be thinking about finding someone to marry, someone to date, having children, okay? Having good self-esteem. If you don't have food, you don't got anything, right? So you need those first. If you have food, water, oxygen, all of those things, the next level of needs up are safety and security needs. To have a house, to feel like you're not constantly going to be robbed, so to feel safe and to feel secure. That's the next level of needs that you need to take care of. If you have these, we go into the psychological needs. Psychological needs, these are the needs of love and friendship, the need to feel like you belong. So having good friends, having loved ones, having a relationship with someone romantically. This is the next level of need that we try to fulfill. If we have that, we've got food, we've got a house, we've got lots of good friends and a romantic partner, well, then we want to feel a sense of accomplishment. We want to have high self-esteem. We want to have a good job. All right, so we have our needs of prestige and self-esteem. If all of these needs are taken care of, the next level that human beings try to achieve is that of self-actualization. And self-actualization for Maslow is realizing your full potential as a human being. And we'll talk about what self-actualization is on the next slide. But one thing that I want to note is this is the model hierarchy of needs that everyone gets in their textbook. But this is not the final one that Maslow proposed. Maslow later on in life included a level above self-actualization, which is self-transcendence, which has to do with fulfilling one's spiritual needs. But for the most part, people have neglected self-transcendence, and a lot of research has been done on self-actualization. So self-actualization, becoming a whole person, developing to your full potential. All right, very few people get to the level of self-actualization according to Maslow. So maybe some individuals that we can think of as self-actualizers, maybe Albert Einstein, George Washington Carver, Eleanor Roosevelt. There are a variety of other people that we might have predicted reach the level of self-actualization. These are individuals that are going to have certain personality characteristics. So for instance, they're going to have an objective perception of reality. What this means is they know what they're good at, they know what they're bad at, and they're comfortable with what they're bad at. Okay, they don't have any delusions about their strengths and weaknesses. They know what they're good at, they know what they're bad at. They have a full acceptance of their own nature. They might be bad at writing things down, but that's okay. They realize that they're bad at writing things down, and they're going to take their life in a different direction. They know what they're good at, they know what they're bad at. All right, maybe they're not the best at math. That's fine. They can find some other area to be successful in. These are going to be individuals that are very resistant to conform. All right, they are going to come up with novel solutions to problems. So they're going to be very creative in this sense. They're not going to be base their ideas on what people have previously done. It doesn't bother them if they are a trailblazer. Again, they're very comfortable with who they are. They don't need to prove anything to anybody. Why follow what everybody else is doing? They're going to have some kind of commitment and dedication to some work, some higher calling. This isn't necessarily spiritual, but it could be spiritual. So some commitment to work, eradicating an illness, making the country a better place, maybe uncovering some scientific discovery. Whatever it is, they have some kind of work that they're really interested in, and they spend long and hard hours in that line of work. When they do their work, when they are in the groove, so to speak, they have these what's known as peak experiences, which are kind of mystical experiences that everything feels right when they are in the middle of doing some work. So for instance, if you have played like a sport like basketball, maybe it's the case that you're playing basketball and all of a sudden you stop thinking, right? And your body's just doing things on its own. You're very successful. You don't necessarily have to think about things. That's an example of a peak experience. You're kind of like outside of your body. Your body's just going and doing the thing. So Maslow argued that peak experiences during work are a hallmark of self-actualizers. But again, this is very rare that someone becomes a self-actualizer. Carl Rogers, who is probably the individual that coined the term humanistic psychology, the individual that really popularized it, he argued that everybody can experience self-actualization. All you have to do is present that individual with unconditional positive regard. So that individual just needs acceptance from somebody else, love from somebody else. This is unconditional love that no matter what happens, somebody loves you no matter what. And if you give somebody unconditional positive regard, they're able to grow as a person and they're able to reach self-actualization. But they need this unconditional positive regard. They need someone to love them no matter what. Sometimes your parents can present this to you, but not all the time. For some people, their parents are not necessarily the best people or might just not know how to do this. So this is where Carl Rogers' humanistic therapy comes into play. And this is specifically called client-centered therapy. Let me back up a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. If infants receive unconditional love, if you receive unconditional love from your parents, you're more likely to reach self-actualization. And this follows a curious paradox. So Rogers stated, the curious paradox is that when I can accept myself as who I am, then I can change. Okay, if you're comfortable with who you are, your pros and your cons, then and only then can you change, according to Carl Rogers. So he developed a way of conducting therapy, which is really centered on the client. Instead of calling someone patient as if they're sick, we call them a client because we're working together. And instead of the therapist trying to find out what's in your unconscious, like what you might do if you're a psychoanalyst, instead, what we do is we give unconditional positive regard to the person and let them dictate what they want to talk about, okay? Let the client speak about what they want to speak about and give them love and affection, okay? And by love and affection, I mean accepting them for who they are as a person, all right? So this is very different from Freudian and psychodynamic approaches to therapy. All right, so what happened to humanistic psychology? Well, it was a reactionary movement. And reactionary movements flourish when what they're reacting to still exists. But humanistic psychology came at a period of time where people stopped caring that much about psychoanalysis. It came at a time where behaviorism was weakening. And so for the most part, it kind of died off. All right, there are very few humanistic psychologists nowadays. I want to say actually that there is one place in Georgia, I think the University of West Georgia, that has a program specifically on humanistic psychology, but they're very, very few and far between. Not many people take a humanistic perspective to therapy nowadays. All right. In the 1990s, however, Humanistic psychology was reborn and rebranded as positive psychology. In fact, some of you might have had a class from Dr. Halliburton specifically on positive psychology. Positive psychology is looking at human flourishing, human success, as opposed to in most of the time in abnormal psychology. We look at how human beings are awful. We look at how human beings are unsuccessfully happy. Right? We look at mental illness. We look at negative aspects of human beings, as opposed to looking at, instead of what makes a human lesser or what makes a human mentally sick or have a mental disorder, we take a human being that's average, or like, what do I want to say? Human being from an average emotional state to a very positive state, okay? Very infrequently in psychology do we look at human flourishing and human success. So positive psychology tries to give another spin to that. So positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life worth living, the scientific study of happiness, human success. And we can think of this. This movement really started with a wide variety of psychologists, but Martin Seligman is one name that you want to remember for positive psychology. He helped really spurn this idea of positive psychology. All right, so that's our discussion of motivation. And we will we'll continue with the biological approach in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk with you later. Bye-bye.